Jonas had never been good at holding onto things, jobs, relationships, dignity, but debt seemed to have a particular taste for him, like they could sniff out desperation and follow it like hungry scavengers across the galaxy. That evening, virally a 7 neon drizzle made the streets shimmer like a kaleidoscope gone wrong, reflecting off the slick surfaces of the hovering buses, which were currently stuck in a traffic jam that could have been caused by anything from a glitching grav lift to a raccoon-sized AI drone arguing with a street lamp about protocol. Jonas muttered curses that probably sounded offensive in at least 3 interstellar languages as he ducked under the plastic awning of a noodle bar, only to realize the bar was really a holographic projection, and he had just tried to eat air noodles. Great, he thought, starving, wet, and humiliated, 3 of his favorite states. Then the air shivered, not with wind but with an odd, buzzing hum, like 1,000 tiny translators arguing over the pronunciation of the word debt. A doorway formed out of nothing, glowing softly like a tired star that had been overworked. Jonas blinked. He thought he might be hallucinating, either from exhaustion or the questionable noodle bar diet, until the figure stepped through. She looked human enough at first glance. If you ignored the long ears that stretched past her shoulders and twitched occasionally, and the subtle shimmer of her skin under the streetlights that suggested she hadn't been born on a human world, she could have been just another passerby. But there was something in her eyes, sharp and intelligent, as if she had catalogued every human flaw in the last 30 seconds and found them mildly entertaining. "Jonas," she said, and Jonas jumped so violently he knocked over a street vendor's hololamp, causing it to flicker and sputter in protest. "I'm glad we could meet without the usual interstellar legal formalities." What?" Jonas stammered, trying to straighten himself while simultaneously attempting to retrieve a virtual noodle that had disappeared into the ether. "Are you some kind of debt collector? Because, trust me, you have a face for gentle negotiations, not aggressive intimidation." Alara, the alien woman, tilted her head and her ears twitched, a subtle gesture that Jonas immediately interpreted as amusement. "You owe me, Jonas, and I have ways of making this very clear." Jonas swallowed. Right, the debt. That thing that started when I accidentally, very professionally, I assure you, turned 3 surveillance drones into abstract art on the small moon near Sector 7G. He waved his hands vaguely, as if gesturing at the moon would erase the memory. Alara did not laugh, she did not even smile at first. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the corners of her mouth curved upward, and Jonas thought maybe she did have a sense of humor, one that humans might describe as mildly terrifyingly amused. "I am offering a solution," she said. "A 5-month relationship, it is contractual, you will fulfill obligations and I will consider the debt settled." Jonas blinked. "Excuse me." "I mean it," Alara said, stepping closer. Her ears brushed lightly against the rain, picking up droplets like delicate antennas. 5 months, you agree and your debt disappears, you refuse and well, let's not explore the unpleasant alternative. You might end up on a shuttle crewed entirely by bureaucracy drones, which is not pleasant. Jonas imagined himself in a crowded spacecraft with nothing but clipboards and fluorescent lights, and for some reason that was enough to make him nod. Fine, yes, 5 months, you got it. Contract signed, mentally, verbally, whatever you need." Alara's ears flicked, an expression Jonas decided meant approval, though he wasn't entirely sure. "Very well, the terms are simple. You will accompany me, observe customs, attend social functions, and," she glanced at him, and he felt a twinge of unease, "be present in a manner consistent with the contract. Any breach could result in the debt being reinstated with consequences." Jonas attempted to joke. Consequences like being tickled into submission by alien kittens or something more dramatic. Alara raised an eyebrow and the ear that twitched in his direction seemed to snort in amusement. "Possibly both," she said, and Jonas felt that somehow she was serious. The first days of the agreement were predictably chaotic. Jonas tried to navigate Alara's world, which involved everything from floating gardens with anti-gravity water streams to robotic waiters that argued philosophy with patrons. He learned quickly that her society valued precision, politeness, and strangely small mechanical gadgets that made no practical sense but looked fascinating. Alara, on the other hand, seemed amused by his blunders. When Jonas tripped over a levitating step, she caught him, only to have her ears wrap around the handrail like additional limbs, steadying both of them and eliciting a laugh he couldn't entirely suppress. Despite the humor, Jonas could feel a subtle undercurrent of caution in Alara. She wasn't merely observing him, she was cataloging him, testing his reactions, measuring his honesty and loyalty. Her long ears, always moving in ways he couldn't anticipate, were like a second set of eyes and moods, conveying irritation, curiosity, or delight with subtle twitches and curls. Jonas often found himself talking to her ears, half joking, half pleading, trying to negotiate peace treaties with appendages that seemed to have opinions of their own. At night, when the city lights turned into streaks of neon reflection on wet surfaces, Jonas sometimes caught Alara staring at him, not in the way of accusation or calculation, but in quiet observation. It made him uncomfortable and curious at the same time, a mixture he hadn't felt in years. He started to wonder if this temporary, transactional relationship might be less temporary than intended. But he pushed the thought away, reminding himself that he owed her a debt, and that keeping his head above water and dry was priority one. Their evenings included trips through alien marketplaces where fruits glowed like captured starlight, and Jonas discovered he had an inexplicable talent for accidentally activating devices that shouldn't exist yet. Alara, ever composed, would gently correct his mistakes, sometimes muttering in a language that made his head spin, her ears curling in a way that suggested exasperation but also affection. On one occasion, Jonas tried to impress her with a hover skate trick, only to end up entangled in a net of levitating laundry drones, dangling upside down like a confused bat while Alara walked past, laughing softly, her ears bouncing with each chuckle. By the end of the first month, Jonas began to understand that this arrangement was not just a legal contract. It was a delicate dance, balancing humor, obligation, and curiosity. Alara had her ways, strict and precise, but she was not without playfulness. And Jonas, for all his clumsiness and bad luck, realized he had stumbled into a strange, improbable partnership that might just redefine everything he thought he knew about debts, aliens, and himself. It was, in every sense, absurd, dangerous, and thrilling. And Jonas, soaked and tangled in hoverdust and nerves, wouldn't have had it any other way. Jonas woke to the soft hum of the city, which was not a gentle alarm but the collective sigh of millions of anti-gravity vehicles and low-level orbital satellites debating their routes above Virlia 7. He rubbed his eyes, already regretting the decision to drink yesterday's street tea, which, despite its glowing orange hue and sweet scent, left a lingering taste somewhere between melted marshmallows and burnt lithium. Alara was already up, of course, standing at the small window of their temporary lodgings and inspecting the streets below with her long ears tilted forward, alert, as if she could hear the city breathing and plotting. "Don't do that," Jonas said, waving at the ears. "Seriously, I'm not ready for a lecture on spatial ethics before breakfast." Alara turned, her eyes glinting like twin moons reflected in a prism. "I am not lecturing. I am observing and sometimes listening to the city's mood." Her ears twitched, a subtle curl at the tips that Jonas interpreted as amusement, though he also feared it could be a warning. "You might try it someday, but for now, focus on not knocking over any more furniture with your gravity boots." Jonas stumbled to his feet, tripping over the edge of a levitating rug that had inexplicably adopted a circular patrol route around the room. "I am perfectly capable," he said, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket. "My only problem is that my boots have a mind of their own, or maybe it's the universe judging me." Breakfast was a cautious affair. Jonas attempted to navigate alien utensils that hovered slightly above the table, requiring a delicate balance of hand-eye coordination and fearlessness. He succeeded just barely, but spilled a bit of anti-gravity milk into his lap. Alara didn't comment. Her ears drooped slightly, a sign of mild irritation Jonas assumed, though he was still learning to read her expressions. He muttered apologies which she ignored, and he decided that silence was her form of approval. After breakfast, they set out into the market districts. Jonas quickly realized that Alara's world had rules he had never imagined. Gravity could fluctuate in pockets, turning the floor into a temporary trampoline. Some stalls contained robotic vendors that refused to speak unless Jonas answered riddles first. Others were guarded by semi-sentient holographic creatures that occasionally argued over pricing ethics. Jonas, for all his clumsiness, found a rhythm, stumble, apologize, laugh, and repeat. Ilara, for her part, moved with precision, her long ears twitching to intercept minor floating hazards, or occasionally flicking a stray drone out of Jonah's path like a conductor directing an orchestra. "You're getting better," she remarked at one point, watching him dodge a gravity puddle. Her voice carried a hint of mockery, though Jonas pretended it went over his head. "Or luck is finally on your side." "Luck is a relative term," Jonas said. "By my calculations, I have about a 32% chance of survival per market visit, not including alien snack consumption. So if I survive today, it's practically a miracle." Ilara's ears twitched, a gesture Jonas now recognized as amused approval. She paused at a stall selling small mechanical sculptures that resembled miniature nebulae trapped in glass spheres. "These are fascinating," Jonas said, poking one gently. "Do they explode?" "They do not," Ilara said, though her eyes sparkled, suggesting she might be bending the truth slightly. "They react to emotion. The vibrations you emit are loud." Jonas frowned. "Loud me, I was perfectly calm." He pinched the sphere and it began to spin violently, colors swirling faster than Jonas could follow. "Okay, maybe not calm," he admitted. They laughed, the kind of laughter that startled a few nearby shoppers, some of whom were multi-limbed and shaped like walking topiaries. Jonas felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the slightly overpowered anti-gravity heaters overhead. Ilara, despite her meticulousness and occasional exasperation, had a way of making him feel lighter, like the gravity around him wasn't trying to pull him down quite so hard. By afternoon, they were navigating the outer ring of the market, where rogue graviton fields could turn a simple stroll into a complicated ballet of leaps and hovers. Jonas miscalculated a jump and ended up dangling upside down from a magnetic street lamp. "A little help," he called. Ilara appeared instantly, her ears curling around the lamp like soft, pliable ropes, steadying him with surprising strength. "You are lucky I am patient," she said, though the twitch of her ears betrayed her amusement. Jonas, dangling like a confused bat, considered this a compliment. They stopped by a floating cafe to regroup. The cafe's menu was a mix of exotic interstellar dishes that glowed faintly or hummed when prodded. Jonas picked a dish labeled Starlight Porridge, which shimmered like a miniature galaxy in a bowl. "How do I eat this without causing a small supernova?" he asked. Ilara chuckled, a sound that vibrated in the air and made Jonas feel oddly grounded despite the zero-gravity chairs. Slowly, respectfully. "And try not to spill it on your boots." They ate, talked, and occasionally glanced at one another with a combination of amusement and careful observation. Jonas realized that Ilara's society valued subtlety, observation, and an odd sense of humor, often delivered with impeccable timing and a flick of an ear. He began to notice little things, how her ears would flatten when she was mildly irritated, or curl in delight when she laughed, or twitch sharply when she suspected him of hiding something. The day ended with a minor crisis. A street performer drone malfunctioned and began hurling glowing fruits into the crowd. Jonas tried to dodge, Ilara tried to catch him, and somehow they ended up with half the fruits on themselves and the other half spinning in suspended arcs above their heads. Jonas looked at Ilara, fruit stuck in his hair, dripping glowing juice down his shirt, and she looked back at him, ears straightened and twitching in disbelief. "You have a talent for chaos," she said. Jonas grinned sheepishly. "It's a gift," he admitted, "not sure if it's appreciated though." Ilara laughed, a sound that made Jonas' heart skip despite the absurdity of the situation. Her ears twitched in rhythm, bouncing slightly with every chuckle, and Jonas realized something important. This partnership, born of debt and obligation, was slowly turning into a series of shared jokes, small victories, and unexpected trust. By the time they returned to their lodgings, Jonas was exhausted, sticky with fruit residue, and oddly exhilarated. Ilara, for her part, moved silently through the room, adjusting floating panels and devices with effortless grace, her ears twitching as if keeping time with an invisible rhythm. Jonas sat down heavily, watching her, and for a fleeting moment, he wondered what it would be like if this 5-month arrangement wasn't temporary at all. But he pushed the thought aside, reminding himself that contracts existed for a reason, debts needed to be settled, and hoverbuses were still probably arguing over who got to block the main street. Still, as Ilara's ears flicked toward him in a gesture he couldn't yet read fully, He felt something he hadn't in a long time. Anticipation, wonder, and the faint, thrilling possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had found someone worth dangling upside down in the name of. Jonas woke to the faint vibration of the orbital lifts humming against the city, a sound that had become almost comforting after 2 months of life with Alara. He stretched, noticing for the first time how his muscles ached differently now, not from clumsiness or exhaustion, but from moving with purpose. His gravity boots were still temperamental, of course, but he had learned to coax them rather than wrestle them into submission, a skill he attributed entirely to Alara's insistence that machines respond better to respect than brute force. He squinted at the long ears twitching beside him, which indicated Alara had been observing him since dawn, probably noting his stretching technique or the way he yawned like a half-sentient blob. "Still alive," she said without turning, her voice smooth and lightly amused. Her ears flicked toward him like antennas receiving a private transmission. "Barely competent, but alive." Jonas grinned, stepping carefully over the levitating rug that had become their unofficial obstacle course. "Barely is my specialty. You've trained me well, Alara. Soon I might even survive a minor interstellar catastrophe without tripping over it." "Progress," she said, finally facing him, a small smirk tugging at her lips. "But the mission today is not survival, it is retrieval. A rare crystal crucial to stabilizing the graviton fields near Sector 12G. Jonas swallowed. Retrieval missions always sounded simpler than they were. In theory, it was just flying to a nearby asteroid belt, grabbing a glowing mineral, and returning. In practice, it involved rogue space pirates, microgravity turbulence, and at least one existential panic attack per participant. Jonas had learned to accept that with Alara, theory and practice were never the same thing, though the practice was usually much funnier. They arrived at the asteroid belt aboard Alara's sleek craft, which hummed and shimmered like liquid metal under the light of distant stars. Jonas had tried to contribute to the piloting, but Alara had gently confiscated the controls, explaining that humans and graviton turbulence are a bad combination. He had protested by pointing out that gravity puddles had never actually killed him. Alara's ears had flicked in what Jonas took as polite disbelief. The asteroids themselves were a chaotic dance of jagged rock, magnetic anomalies, and drifting cargo from long-forgotten interstellar trades. Jonas, in full anti-gravity suit, tried to maneuver through the debris with more confidence than skill. He misjudged a floating chunk of rock, collided with it, and spun in a graceful but alarming orbit until Alara's long ears looped around a stabilizing tether, yanking him to safety with minimal elegance but maximum efficiency. "You are a disaster," Alara said, though her voice carried a warmth that was new, almost indulgent. "But a reliable disaster, at least." Jonas caught his breath, dangling by the tether and grinning sheepishly. "I'll take that as a compliment." They located the crystal, a glowing shard suspended inside a web of microgravitational filaments, humming softly with energy. The retrieval required precise coordination, and Alara guided him through the steps with a mix of patience and playful commentary. "No sudden movements, no touching the field improperly, and whatever you do, do not sneeze into the graviton matrix. Trust me, I've seen what happens when humans sneeze at delicate alien technology." Jonas, trying not to panic, accidentally let out a tiny cough. The crystal wobbled, sending an alarmed blip through the ship's systems. Alara's ears twitched sharply, then she sighed and steadied the crystal with the tips of her fingers and her ears. Jonas blinked. Did your ears just save the universe?" "They did," she said, unbothered, eyes glinting. "And if you survive this, you'll understand why multitasking is sometimes biological." The return trip was calmer, though not without its comic moments. Jonas discovered he had a knack for spilling alien snacks into zero-gravity airlocks, creating floating orbs of syrupy substance that bounced harmlessly off walls but elicited a dry, exasperated comment from Alara each time. By the time they landed, the crystal was secured, the graviton fields stabilized, and Jonas was sticky but triumphant. Back on Virelia 7, the city seemed softer somehow, less hostile, and Jonas realized he saw it differently. The neon reflections, once oppressive, now appeared like a constellation of possibilities. Alara, moving gracefully through their lodgings, was still the exacting, precise being he had learned to respect and trust, yet he noticed her humor more clearly. The tiny eyebrow flicks, the ears' subtle dances, the way she deliberately let him flub minor tasks so she could laugh afterward. The 5-month mark arrived with a quiet, understated ceremony. Jonas had come to understand that the debt had been only part of the transaction. The real transformation was in himself. He could navigate alien environments with competence, engage with beings vastly different from him without constant panic, and most importantly, he had learned to connect. To laugh, to adapt, to trust, and he realized, almost reluctantly, to care. Alara stood beside him, ears flicking in rhythm with her quiet thoughts. Jonas hesitated. "So debt's technically settled," he said, voice light but carrying weight. "What now?" Alara's ears twitched, a subtle smile tugging at her lips. "Now, Jonas, you may leave," she said, deliberately ambiguous. "Or you may stay. That is no longer my concern. But consider this. A capable human, surprisingly resilient, with a tendency to attract chaos, might be useful or at least amusing for longer than the contract stipulated." Jonas laughed, feeling the sound echo in the quiet room, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Useful and amusing," he repeated. "I think I can live with that." She reached out, gently tapping his shoulder, and for a fraction of a second the world seemed to pause. The city hum fading, the orbiting satellites holding their positions, and the universe shrinking to just the two of them. Jonas realized that their partnership had evolved from obligation to genuine connection. The long ears, once so alien and intimidating, now felt familiar, comforting even, as if they had become a language of their own.